Hazlitt, Okemos, Meridian Township. Home TV.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Open Line. I am your host, D'Destin Kaufmann. With almost 300,000 cases of pediatric arthritis nationwide, it's obviously not a disease that is more commonly referred to as an old person's disease. And here to discuss that, I have a wonderful panel this evening. Sitting directly to my right is Dr. John Kolstoe. He is a rheumatologist in East Lansing. And to his right, we've got Unique Jones. And joining Unique are her lovely children. We have Unity Espinoza, and we've got a great smile over there, and Josiah Espinoza. Thank you both for being here as well. Before we start, if you maybe want to introduce yourselves and just tell us a little bit about what you do and why you're here.
Well, my name is John Kolstoe. I'm an adult rheumatologist, since we're dealing with pediatric things. And there are pediatric rheumatologists that do specialize in just taking care of kids. When you do a rheumatology fellowship, you'll be exposed to pediatrics, so we do see it. But my focus is typically on adults, which usually starts at about 16, 17 years of age and on upwards.
Okay.
And I've been in the East Lansing area since about 1994, so I'm in my 20th year here. I ended up I got my MD degree at the University of North Dakota School of Medicine, which was actually about a mile from my parents' home. So in many respects, I had almost all of my schooling within a mile of my parents' home until I did fellowships and that type of stuff. My rheumatology fellowship was done at the real U of M, which usually takes explanation in this type of geography, because the real U of M is located on the banks of the Mississippi in the great state of Minnesota.
Oh, okay. I like where that went. Okay. I was going to say, we don't talk about U of M in this facility. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, it was curious when I got to Michigan, because I grew up in North Dakota, and to the west of us is the University of Montana. To the north of us is the University of Manitoba, and to the east of us is the University of Minnesota, all of which are referred to as the U of M.
Gotcha. I gotcha. So it's a location joke, I guess, at that point.
So that's been one of my fun little jokes here.
Right.
But I've been here since about 1994, doing adult rheumatology.
Very good. All right, Unique.
I am an expert mom.
Expert mom, I like that. Okay.
I have 3 children, and I also am a statewide helpline consultant for the state of Michigan, dealing with early childhood programs. I have been in Michigan since 2005. I'm originally from San Antonio, Texas.
Okay, I'm sorry for you.
So the weather, oh yes.
Yeah, after this winter, you might be going back.
Right, I've thought about it.
Yeah, I think we all thought about it.
I love Michigan, and I had to throw myself into learning about arthritis once Josiah was diagnosed at the age of 3. So.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you all for being here. I know personal time is very valuable to all of us, and we appreciate your time. We're going to start off with a little pre-recorded story on someone who is also dealing with this to kind of open up the show. Go ahead.
I have rheumatoid arthritis. Before I found out, I was able to ride my bike, just do normal things that kids could do. And then it wasn't really until college that it really started affecting me a lot. I was working at the MSU Bakery full-time as a cake decorator, and I had noticed pretty much when I started college that I started having joint pain, and my mom has rheumatoid arthritis, and I was kind of telling her my symptoms and what was going on, and she had mentioned that it was probably what she had. I just noticed it getting progressively worse to the point where I couldn't really stand and work anymore because my knees would start to swell up. It's just kind of like a throbbing pain. It's kind of like it's being stabbed almost. I dislocated my kneecap, and that pain was just through the roof. If I use that as my 10, I was probably in an 8 at my worst. I definitely gauge pain differently now. I'm used to a certain amount of pain. I have a disfiguring disease, so my joints will turn, especially if I don't get on something preventative. It was really strange because I would have pain in one knee and then a little while later it would switch to another knee. Rheumatoid is symmetrical like that. It was just very, very strange and I felt crazy. It's so strange, like I feel like I'm much older than I am. But as soon as I got on Celebrex, then it was like night and day. I was able to function normally. I mean, obviously I still have pain, but it's just a ton better now. I do feel alone sometimes because it's hard to explain to people. It's still one of those really strange things that shouldn't really happen when you're young. I try my best to be as normal as I can. You have to. It can only bring you down so much.
Okay. Well, maybe we can start with you, Doctor. What is arthritis?
Well, when I first started my fellowship and started reading about more details on this, the Arthritis Foundation at that time pointed out that there are over 120 different types of arthritis. And if we look at what is the definition, it's usually a problem in the space between the two bones, in the joint space, is usually how we talk about arthritis itself. You can break it down in a bunch of different ways. I like to break it down in things like traumatic or damage to the joint, so that's osteoarthritis. At one time we used to think that osteoarthritis was pretty much inevitable for all of us, that the cartilage would break down so that all elderly people would have some arthritis, but now that we have plenty of people making it to the age of 100, what we find is there are people at age 80 who really don't have any sign of arthritis at all. It's a minority, but it isn't inevitable for everybody. There are inflammatory arthritises, and those can be broken down into a couple of different groups. The autoimmune is where the immune system, for the most part, loses tolerance to ourselves. So it's kind of like an organ rejection of bits and pieces of ourselves. And the immune system is actually a pretty complex thing. And the big guy up above probably did that so that it would be hard to make things fall apart.
Right.
But when they do, then they can get caught in these do loops in which we get inflammation that persists. So that things like rheumatoid arthritis in the adult and some of our juvenile rheumatoid arthritises are or juvenile idiopathic arthritis, as they've been called for the last decade or so, are oftentimes that problem of loss of tolerance, so that the immune system is kind of attacking ourselves. There is also a much rarer group that are autoinflammatory, in which the more what's called the innate immune system ends up misfiring and causing problems. Unfortunately, we don't see a lot of that. Right. What I'll see as a rheumatologist are also muscle pain type of things. So that falls into things that fall into that range are things like fibromyalgia, which curiously enough, most patients with fibromyalgia, probably 95%, have some type of disturbance of their sleep. And we can probably bring out pain and fatigue by just sleep depriving people if we do it long enough. And one of the characteristics of almost all of these disorders is a genetic predisposition. And the genes play a big part of it, but it turns out that it's probably a complicated thing, not a simple thing.
Of course it is.
And a long time ago, it was postulated that there were at least 30 genes out there that would confer some susceptibility to developing rheumatoid arthritis or inflammatory arthritis, lupus, that type of stuff. But it wasn't one gene that you needed. You needed to probably have, out of those 30, at least 4 of them. And one of the things that makes these disorders so unique to the individual, I kind of point out to residents or people that want to listen to what I'm saying, that if we have 30 things and we grab 4 at a time, it turns out that for the first choice you have 30 things to choose from, and then for the second one you have 29. So the total number would be 30 times 29. If we're doing that 4, it's 30 times 29 times 28 times 27.
Right.
Since we don't care about the order, we divide by how many ways can you grab that. Turns out that number is 27,405 different combinations that can show up as rheumatoid arthritis.
Wow.
So that's why each and every one patient that I see is truly unique.
Yeah.
because each of those genetic glitches has something to do with transduction pathways or receptors or promoters on the DNA. And so that's also why a medication that works wonderfully for one person may not even touch another person.
Wow.
Because it's really a different system that's glitching in them.
Right. Interesting.
And that makes it, complicated. From my chair, it's very interesting. From their chair,
You're right. It's just painful.
it's not as interesting.
Right. I do want to remind our viewers that this is a call-in show. If you would like to be a part of the program, you are welcome to do that. Of course, that is at the bottom of your screen. You can also be a part of the show via Twitter, and our address is @HomeTV, so feel free to join us that way. Maybe you're coming up right now. We're going to get to you. Unique, maybe, because we want the perspective from the family. How did it affect you? How did you find out that this was a problem? What were some of the signs? Because kids go out and they get bruised up and you're like, oh, you just fell down. Yeah, so where did you go? How did you know?
I found out that Josiah had arthritis because he was having problems as early as 15 months of age. He was in and out of Sparrow. The signs that he was showing was, first of all, he was just in pain. Like, he would stiffen like a board. He would scream and cry. He was running fevers, and his fevers would go up to like 104. And I was constantly in and out of the hospital with him. So they finally did blood work, and then they found that correct me if I'm wrong, but the alkaline phosphatase level was elevated. The normal is supposed to be, I think the highest it's supposed to be is like 380, but his was 1,393.
Oh, wow.
So at that time, they sent him to a few different doctors and then thought, maybe we should send him to Ann Arbor, which they did. So he went to Mott Children's Hospital where he saw Dr. Barbara Adams, and she was the one that diagnosed him.
Okay. Now, do you have recollection of this? Do you remember being in a lot of pain?
Well, I remember when I was coming downstairs in my house, and then my knees started hurting.
Yeah.
And then I sit it down, and I told my mom, and then she came, and then it was hurting really bad.
Did it feel like it was throbbing, or did it feel like a needle?
A needle.
A needle, yeah. And did that happen a lot, or was it just that one time?
Just that one time.
Just that one time? Okay. And so then how many times did this happen before you were like, maybe something's wrong? Before you got the test, obviously there was a pattern of...
It took a long time. He wasn't diagnosed till he was 3. So it was another 15 months of going back and forth to the pediatrician, going back and forth to different specialists. He was sent to a kidney specialist because they couldn't pinpoint what was wrong. But I started noticing things like red blotchy spots on his knees, and his chest. It was like he was, the autoimmune issue where his body was fighting him, so he was breaking out in rashes. His knees were swelling, and sometimes he would have trouble bending his fingers or bending his knees. And so once he finally got to the rheumatologist, she was able to say, she knew right away that it was arthritis, and she started him on his medicine.
He didn't mention the fevers, but he probably had fevers too.
He had many fevers.
Fevers, that's another sign. Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Because this is not something, when we were discussing the topic, I was like, childhood arthritis? Like, is that a thing that exists? Because you associate it with, someone who's much older. I do anyway. So, when I started seeing some of the figures, I was shocked. But obviously this is a problem. Is there anything other than, genetics that cause it? Is it something that can happen from an environmental standpoint?
Well, what we'll see is that if we look at identical twins, so they supposedly have the same genes.
Right.
And what we'll see with rheumatoid arthritis is if one has rheumatoid arthritis, the lifetime risk for the other is about 20%. Now, this is adult rheumatoid arthritis. If we take a look at adult lupus, the lifetime risk that both will have lupus is about 80%.
Right.
So it depends a little bit on the disease as to how much. But by the fact that it isn't universal tells us it's not all the genes, that there's got to be something in the environment. And then in the last 20 years perhaps, and a little bit accelerated in even the last few years, the issue of something called the microbiome has become fascinating. And the microbiome, if you are familiar with it...
You're going to have to explain it because I don't know what a microbiome is.
Well, the microbiome are the bacteria, fungus, viruses that are within us and upon us.
Okay.
And it turns out that in terms of total number of cells, there are perhaps as many as 10-fold more bacteria, fungus, and viruses in and on us than there are human cells.
Oh, that's nice.
And the interesting thing is it looks like one of the, that it may be abnormal proportions of the microbiome that promote things like rheumatoid arthritis. Okay. In rheumatoid arthritis, periodontal disease is more common in the rheumatoids than the non-rheumatoid population. And there's a bacteria that is associated with that, and that bacteria tends to citrullinate proteins. And rheumatoids will make antibodies against that citrulinated protein, which looks like it slops over and then helps cause some of the autoimmune disease in rheumatoid. And it looks like there may be bacteria that promote the development of rheumatoid arthritis in some individuals, because it's not universal in all patients. And that also goes, more recently there was a study that looked at a type of bacteria in the gut, showing that it was in 73% of patients who had new onset rheumatoid arthritis, but only 23% of the general population, suggesting that that bacteria and that microbiome abnormality might actually be fueling and triggering the immune response we call rheumatoid arthritis.
Right.
And because it wasn't universal, so 27% did not have the bacteria, it isn't the cause of rheumatoid arthritis in everybody. And that's where that genetic, predisposition.
Right. Of course, it can't be that easy.
And then something in the environment that kind of kicks it off. Other environmental things that can kick it off would be in, like, say, a lupus patient. Sunshine will cause a normal death pattern in the skin, and that's called apoptosis. Okay. But apoptosis in a lupus patient can actually trigger their lupus. So sunshine is one of those things that in some patients will trigger their arthritis.
Interesting. Unity, how are you?
Good.
You're just waiting to talk, aren't you? Yeah. Do you also have some arthritis, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah? What does it feel like when you get it?
It hurts.
It hurts, yeah. Where does it hurt on you?
My knees.
Your knees? Yeah. And do you feel better when you take medicine for it? Does it help? Yeah? Well, that's good. And she is similar then? I mean...
She is. They have the same form of arthritis, but they consider Josiah's to be more severe.
Okay.
She found out, I found out about her when I was taking Josiah to an appointment, but I noticed that Unity was having the same symptoms. And so I just asked the doctor, I was like, we don't have an appointment scheduled for her, but can you just kind of look at her really quick? And as soon as she looked at her, she was like, we need to get her in the system now. She's got to be seen. She has arthritis.
Wow.
And I was like, okay.
Okay, here we go again.
We have 2 children that have arthritis. And
right. Now, how do they start treatment? In other words, obviously you're not going to get thrown right into a medical, or maybe you do.
Depending on how severe or non-severe it is, the doctor will let you know what his or her recommendation is. Unity takes a lighter version of medicine while Josiah takes the highest dosage that he can get for his age.
Right.
So it just depends on the child. Like the doctor was saying, everybody's unique. So
right. Now, talk about like some of the flare-ups as far as like how often is this something that's happening 5 times a day, 20 times a day, once a day?
Excuse me. It is an ongoing thing. The most severe points that I find with the children is during the wintertime.
Weather, okay.
The weather. When it gets cold, when it's raining, when it's snowing outside. Of course, that's also the time they want to go outside and make snow angels and all that good stuff.
Right.
But that's the time that I see that we're in and out the hospital mainly, especially with Josiah.
Maybe it's just a disease that tells us that we don't like winter. No, I'm just kidding. Because I don't like the winter either, so I understand. If it's something that is sort of an aloof disease, if you will, I mean, we have all these little things that we can sort of track it, but we don't have a direct line of communication with it. Is it possible that everybody has a form of arthritis? It just isn't to the point where it's affecting them enough that they're seeing a doctor?
Well, again, that's the 120 different types of arthritis.
Of course it is, right.
So that these guys have what's called Still's disease. And Still's actually may be one of the autoinflammatory type of disorders.
Okay.
And so it has a little bit different twist to it than some of the autoimmune ones. Mm-hmm. And it may be in the future that we'll actually be treating Still's pretty differently than we treat rheumatoid, even though we've kind of taken one of the nice things about most of our rheumatic diseases is that they're so unique in terms of their presentation that not all patients show up the same. Mm-hmm. And so what the American College of Rheumatology a long time ago did was came up with criteria for the classification of patients so that we could do studies and have some type of uniform group of patients. So for example, lupus, they have 11 characteristics. If you have 4 of those 11, then for the purposes of study, we'll call that lupus.
Okay.
And then we can apply a treatment and see how well that works in that group of people.
Right.
So you may not have all 11. You may only have 4 of those characteristics.
Okay.
And where it becomes a little bit on the baffling, if we do that, how many combinations thing with 11 characteristics taken 4 at a time, again, that gets to be in the 800 different
right.
combinations of presentation.
Right.
And then what you want to do is look at the severity and then kind of treat appropriately to the severity.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So,
how, obviously, as a child, when you're in school, children are active, they want to play, they want to be like everybody else. Mm-hmm. Is this something that the schools work with you and the kids with? And
yes.
how does that work at school?
When I take them to see their doctor, if they're having, with arthritis, you have your good days and you have your bad days.
Right.
So there are notes with the school from the doctor saying that, if they start hurting, if things become too much, they're to stay hydrated. Sometimes Josiah and Unity might have to get pulled out of their PE activities if they're hurting the night before or that day. Just to kind of let their body rest a little bit because it goes through so much with this disease. Is
it when they're active only, or if they're sitting completely still, the pain is still there?
It can still be there. They can wake up and be in excruciating pain from it.
All right, so obviously concentration is going to be a lot more difficult if you're sitting in a class as well.
Yes.
Are the side effects from any of the medications causing any issues with learning at all, or do they have that balance out pretty good where it just kind of takes care of what it does? Mm-hmm. And
the side effects are not that bad when they first started their medicine. Of course, it's an adjustment because it's foreign to your body, but now they do fine with that. It doesn't affect their learning abilities, and they both love school. So.
Cool. Well, school is fun.
Yes.
I like school too. Is it now? This is just a medicine that they take on a regular basis,
yes.
like every day, not just when there's a flare-up.
Correct.
They're on a regimen. Okay. Maybe you can go through some of the ways to treat it. And obviously, as you said, there's a different treatment for everybody, but maybe just some of the basics. In other words, maybe we could go through just some of the quick pharmaceuticals, and then do you also prescribe, more natural or herbal or exercise, or what are some of the ways that you also recommend that someone with this type of disease would would act?
Well, over the years, we've kind of figured out compounds that seem to be beneficial. The frustration with many of the medications we use, they'll be referred to as DMARDs, which is disease-modifying anti-rheumatic drugs,
Okay.
as an overview class.
Okay.
And then another differentiation in there are kind of small molecules versus biologics. So small molecules are usually things you can take by pills and by mouth. There are things like, are they on methotrexate, either one of them?
No, Unity takes naproxen, and then Josiah's on Solendec.
On just Solendec, okay. So neither one of them are on what we refer to as DMARDs at this point in time.
Okay.
The disease-modifying are drugs that were, in controlled double-blinded studies has been shown to decrease the damage to the joints, would be the kind of definition.
Right.
If we jump back, to the 1950s, we really had just gold shots. And gold shots are actually very effective. Unfortunately, April of 2011 was the last time gold shots were available.
Is that because they were so expensive?
Not actually.
Gold went through the roof.
Because no, gold is actually cheap. You can still get it in Canada, and I have a patient who gets her gold through Canada.
Oh, okay.
Her insurance company doesn't pick it up because it's a Canadian drug.
Right.
It's no longer manufactured in the United States, so we can't get it here.
Why would they have stopped it if it was effective?
I will let you go into medical economics on that one.
Okay, all right.
And I'll try
Too much to talk about. Okay.
I'll try not to vet myself on why do we have drug shortages.
Okay, no,
for drugs that are actually fairly effective.
Okay, I get exactly
some
where
of it
you're
with
going.
gold is it's injectable. And I trained at a time period where we were still initiating and maintaining patients on gold.
Okay.
But in many respects, other drugs came along like methotrexate, which are taken by mouth and are as effective, and so they really started to take the place of gold.
Okay.
And as an adult rheumatologist, I'm not sure that I've ever really initiated gold therapy, but I've maintained it in people who are doing well on it. And it really is a very effective drug. Most of these medications, some people like to call them immunosuppressants. And I don't really like that term because we're not really immunosuppressing.
Right.
If we take a look at rheumatoid arthritis, what we have is an immune system that's out of balance. So if we look in the joint fluid of a rheumatoid's knee, what we'll find is there are a lot of white blood cells that shouldn't be there. So that's an overactive evidence. If we do a skin test for things like Candida, which we're all exposed to that fungus, we should all welt up from that because our immune system has seen it, and we would be able to mount a skin reaction. But a patient with active rheumatoid arthritis actually have decreased T cell activity, so they're anergic. So part of their immune system is actually on underdrive, while part of the immune system is on overdrive. Most of our successful therapies actually normalize that. Okay. So once you get them doing well, then they can react to trichophyton or Candida on the skin again, and the joints, improve. So what we're really doing with these drugs is rebalancing the immune system.
Okay.
And if you truly did immunosuppression, you're pushing the drugs too much.
Right, I got you.
And they can. And their methotrexate was initially used as a cancer drug. They would use about 1,000 milligrams daily for 3 days in a row for the treatment of things like leukemia back in the 1950s. And it'll knock out the leukemia, but it can knock out the rest of your bone marrow at those kind of doses.
What else are you losing?
Our goofy doses with rheumatoid arthritis are 7.5 to about 30 milligrams at the most, 1 day a week.
Oh, okay.
In contrast to basically 3,000 over a 3-day time period.
Right.
And so we're not getting that immunosuppression that you would get when you're using real high doses.
Right. Do you incorporate exercises or any sort of extracurricular activities in addition to the medicines?
Yes. On their good days, they do participate in PE at school.
Okay.
But other than that, Josiah is very active with his school. He does play soccer. And it was recommended by the rheumatologist to keep them as active as possible. If they can do it, allow them to do it.
Okay.
So they play outside, they do sports, they're getting ready to be enrolled in karate anything that's going to keep their bodies moving.
Did they mention yoga? I saw a lot of yoga references.
No, but yoga is a good thing.
I mean, it's more of a stretchy style, I think, of exercising.
And they do like to exercise with me at home, and we also have the Michael Jackson game, so they get to dance around the house.
Okay, well, that's good.
And that helped us through the winter. So,
are you good at the Michael Jackson game? A little bit? Yeah. Are you? I bet you are. Yeah, you're gonna smile, but you're good at it, aren't you?
Yes.
Yeah.
A little bit.
You're just a little bit good? Well, you know, it takes practice. Everything takes practice. Well, I guess Michael came out pretty good right off the bat, didn't he?
His height, but I lost.
You lost? Well, you just keep practicing. You'll get it. It just takes some time. Who would like to remind our viewers that this is a call-in show? If you would like to be a part of it, if you have a question or comment for myself or the panel, please feel free to give us a call. You can also tweet us as well, and that information is at the bottom of your screen. Is it something that children can outgrow? In other words, can someone have it and then not have it? Just the same as someone can not have it and get it?
The different disorders will have different patterns of how they present.
So it's not a single answer for all the different kinds.
Right. So there are things like adult rheumatoid arthritis that if you're rheumatoid factor positive, 2 years worth of disease, the likelihood of lifetime remission is very low.
Okay.
So that group of people probably need to be on medication for a lifetime.
Okay.
And as we've gotten to know more about this stuff over time, what we see is kids with juvenile immune arthritis, many of them will have it in adulthood as well. So it doesn't necessarily just go away.
Right.
There are some that do go into remission. We used to kind of say, well, it always goes into remission, and that doesn't look like it's as true. So adult rheumatologists are acquiring more kids. They're no longer kids, but they were people who had, a juvenile form of arthritis in adulthood.
Right.
And so we're ending up taking care of that little group that comes up into our arms. I wanted to kind of go back a little bit on the idea of the exercise. Because in the old days, we used to tell people with arthritis to rest, rest, rest. And that was actually really bad for them.
Okay. Well, hey, we're learning here, right?
And part of the reason for that is because of the pain. If you have pain around a joint and it's been there for at least 3 or 4 weeks, typically muscle strength starts to really drop. So you start getting weak.
Right, you're not using it, okay.
And then if you have like osteoarthritis, so there are little pits in the cartilage and it's kind of a rough surface, one of the things in terms of my trying to encourage patients in their exercise, I asked them if they would be willing to drive from Lansing to the state of Indiana in their car with any shock absorbers, without any shock absorbers on their car.
Huh. Okay.
And would you be willing to do that?
No, I wouldn't. Not with our roads. Are you kidding me?
And the reason for that is the muscles and the tendons are actually absorbing 50% or more of the forces that go through those joints.
Okay.
So if they become weak, then your major shock absorbers become weak, and that increases the pain.
Right.
So one of the things you want for protection is normal strength muscles. So studies have shown pretty clearly that if we get people into moderate, low-level exercise programs, that they actually improve in many different features of their activity. And in things like rheumatoid arthritis, what we'll see is that not only do the joint counts in terms of the number of joints that are inflamed, that can actually drop just with exercise programs. And there's sedimentation rates and C-reactive proteins. Those can also improve just by applying exercise.
Oh.
So it actually does work a bit like one of those DMARDs. It's kind of like if you get the whole body working right, well, things like the immune system actually work a little bit better too.
Right.
So it works on helping with that. And so it's more than just kind of good for you. It's actually therapeutic.
Right, at the same time.
And it turns a lot of people have a problem, I think, with the concept of exercise, because maybe people my generation, think of exercise as being Jane Fonda and spandex, and you have to really
sweat to the oldies or whatever.
And it turns out that if we take a look at exercise for fitness, what you want to do is get out and do at least a half-hour walk 3 or more days out of the week.
Yep.
Anything over that, jogging and that type of stuff, really doesn't change heart attack, stroke, cancer rates. But the half-hour walk 3 or more days out of the week reduces heart attack, stroke, cancer rates by almost 50%. So it's actually...
Okay, so wait, when you go over those 3 days, because we did a heart show, and they said the same thing. The only addition was to walk fast enough to get your heart rate up for 30 minutes.
And that might not even be necessary either.
Okay.
The cardiologists like to say that.
Well, yes, that's their thing.
And one of the things I found fascinating is the people that are promoting exercise and arthritis typically tend to be people who were athletic earlier in life.
Oh. Okay.
And if you go to MSU and go to this trainers and figure out, well, how are we going to get our athletes to be peak performance? What you want to do is get them at about 80% of their maximal cardiac output for at least a half hour, and then do that 3 or more days out of the week, and you'll get them performing at their peak performance. MSU's hockey team, one of the orthopedists here in town was a trainer for them at one time. He was actually a Canadian walk-on. He was a hockey player himself, and he ended up becoming a physician. He's a physician here in town. But he maintains that the ranking of college hockey teams has to do with the ranking of their aerobic conditioning. So if you get them highly aerobically conditioned, those are the guys that do well in the third period.
Right. They're not wearing down.
And I think the game ends in the third period.
Yeah.
So that's when it's the most important to be fit.
Gotcha.
And to work on that endurance.
Yeah.
And we have in our exercise mentality, we have, well, let's shoot for that. Well, that's what we need to win hockey games. But that's not what we need to do to reduce heart attack, stroke, and cancer rates.
Right.
So and when we have people with arthritis, we don't need to get them playing on, NCAA hockey level fitness.
Right.
What we need to do is get them so they can do a half-hour walk 3 or more days out of the week in a comfortable fashion. So one of the fun things about the Arthritis Foundation 30 or 40 years ago, in conjunction with the YMCAs, is they came up with Arthritis Foundation pool programs. And the pool program was designed by physical therapists, and they were looking at range of motion of specific muscles, joints, and kind of designed it around that. And I think the thing I have found interesting is that when we take a look at Tai Chi and we take a look at things like yoga, many of those, though they weren't developed by physical therapists, are doing very similar movements because they kind of figured it out on their own.
Right.
So these programs like Tai Chi and yoga are actually, if you look at the definition of aerobic exercise, they're low-level aerobic exercises.
Right.
Now, you may not be sweating buckets, but you are burning oxygen to do the activity that you're doing, which would be the definition of aerobic. And it looks like that's what you want to do for health benefit.
Right.
And for arthritis patients in particular, it's important. So if they're low functioning, getting them into pool programs.
Yeah.
Because the nice thing about pools is you get rid of gravity, so you don't have the forces of gravity through the joints. You get that buoyancy, and then water will give you the resistance you give it.
Of course, yeah.
So if you can only give a little bit, that's all it gives back.
Right.
So it doesn't resist you a lot.
Uh-huh.
But if you're Michael Phelps or whatever the swimmer guy is, you can burn 10,000 calories in a day and eat Subway out of there.
Right. Well, that's not going to be, I don't think any of us. Maybe, who knows? Now, do you do pool therapy at all? Any sort of water therapy? Okay.
But I think I'm going to take
Maybe that might be a step, huh?
It's a newer idea. The Phoenicians recommended it 8,000 years ago. And Socrates recommended it 2,500 years ago.
Okay.
In Rome...
I've heard his name before.
In Rome, 2,000 years ago, so at the time Christ was born, there were between 800 and 900 pools in Rome.
Ah, interesting fact.
And they were used by the whole populace, not just for entertainment, but also for therapeutic type things.
Right.
And aquatherapy in Rome was a very interesting thing because all those aqueducts,
Oh yeah, sure.
that was partly why they were created, was to bring water into all the public
pools.
Pools.
Hmm.
And the public pools were actually centers for commerce. So surrounding them were shops and things like that.
Right, because afterwards you're hungry, you want to get a snack.
Well, and they would have, you know, entertainment because they would do things in the pools and other stuff. An awful lot of the old Roman statues that you see, those adorned the pools.
Ah.
And that's where they got them from.
Very cool.
So.
Let me ask you, Josiah, do you wake up sometimes with pain? Do you dream about having the pain? Does it affect you when you're dreaming?
Yes, sometimes.
Yeah. Is it easy to go back to sleep afterwards?
No.
No? You get up and go see mom?
Yeah, sometimes.
Yeah.
Or I might just drink water.
Drink some water? Does the water help?
Yeah.
Water helps. So you've got to stay hydrated, huh? Is that a big one for you? Okay, that's good. Are you excited about starting karate or martial arts?
Yes.
Yeah, that'll probably be fun. Is there anyone else in their school that's dealing with this? In other words, are you in communication with other mothers dealing with it?
I don't know any other children actually in the Lansing area that are going through the same thing. I didn't even know that children could get arthritis,
Right.
like many people don't,
Right.
until they were diagnosed, because everyone in my family and their father's family, you know, are all adults that have had arthritis.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
they are the first children in the family that we know of that have gotten it.
Could it be that you know, part of that is just because we weren't thinking to look for it before more recent times?
I think when we talk about stills is so unique that I think, you know, if you had had stills as a kid, you'd be aware of them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because they end up with a salmon-colored rash, it's fevers in the night, and
Right,
a
okay.
whole bunch of arthritis. So it's a pretty, whoops, something's going on here. So it's not a subtle, you know, something that you can ignore.
Right.
And so I think that if it was in the other family members, you'd already know about that.
Mm-hmm.
And the unfortunate thing is probably the combination of you and your husband's genes, whoops, you know, came up with a set of genes that were compatible for developing juvenile onset stills.
There have been, I've been seeing a lot of articles on electromagnetic therapy and mild shock therapy as far as, you know, people who are paralyzed or have some sort of damage to muscles or joints. Is that also a part of a treatment? Do you do any sort of electromagnetic or shocking to joints?
Probably not shocking. There are things like TENS units that can help with pain in some
Okay.
individuals. It's not a universally, you know, beneficial, but it is in some individuals.
Okay. Again,
So-
our toolbox of
Things that,
things we can try to
Right.
to get to go. What is the percentage of heredity involvement? Is it 100%, or you said it's large, but how large?
well, like the kids with, you know, that are identical twins, it would suggest that, you know, it's at least a 50%. So you have to have the right genes before you can, you know, develop the rheumatoid arthritis.
Right. Does it like a certain race? Does it like a certain sex?
Well, it's a little cruel to call it liking.
Well, okay. Yeah.
But you're absolutely right, because what we'll see is, having grown up on the prairie, to the west of where I live would be the Sioux Nation.
Okay.
To the east are the Chippewa, or around here we refer to them as Ojibwa, I think for the most part, but they kind of make up that area. Around Mille Lacs Lake in Minnesota, the Chippewa band in that area, 5% have rheumatoid arthritis. Okay. In the North American, European population, rheumatoid arthritis is more like a 0.5 to 1%. So amongst the Chippewa, it was 5 times as frequent.
Huh.
And if we go over to the Sioux don't have nearly that kind of a ratio or frequency of rheumatoid arthritis, but they have a high frequency of lupus. And those, when we take a look at the genes, they're a bit different genes. So, and when we look at the Asian migration into North America, you can see even by gene tracings how there were multiple Asian migrations into North America.
Right.
And you can kind of see that in the rheumatic diseases or the HLA genes that show up in different groups, going all the way down to like places like Peru.
Right.
And because that's kind of what happened, is that most of the Native Americans were Asians that came across the Siberian Peninsula. And what you'll see is you can find in specific ethnic groups, there may be a higher frequency. If you are African that spent time in the Caribbean, that group of people, if they've been to England, if they've come to the United States, lupus is about 1 in 500.
Right.
Whereas in the general population, it's more like 1 in 2,000.
Right. Oh.
And that's associated with a specific gene that has to do with complement, which is a little protein that has to do with tolerance.
Right.
So it's kind of it's easier for their tolerance to break down, and we know what the gene is.
Gotcha.
So yeah, you see ethnic groups will have different frequencies of the different rheumatic diseases too.
That's really interesting. We do have a public service announcement from the Arthritis Foundation, and it's called The Faces of Arthritis, and we would like to show that now. Take a look.
No matter how old you are,
who you are, or what you do.
Arthritis does not discriminate.
I thought it was an old person's disease.
Then it happened to me.
I was diagnosed with arthritis when I was 4 years old.
I was 2.
I have just turned 50.
I am 1.
I am 1.
I am one of over 50 million Americans affected by the chronic pain of arthritis.
I am one of 300,000 kids with arthritis.
We are your friends.
Your co-workers.
We are your kids.
There are more of us out there than you would think.
We are the face of arthritis.
At the age of 25, I had to stop working.
By the age of 12, I had both my hips replaced.
Sometimes it doesn't allow me to be the mom I want to be.
We are the face of arthritis.
Spread the word.
Tell the world.
If we stand together,
fight together,
we will find a cure.
I believe.
I believe.
I believe.
Do you?
Join the Arthritis Foundation to stop America's #1 cause of disability. Learn the truth about arthritis at facesofarthritis.org.
All right, welcome back. Now, it's my understanding that you are an advocate?
Yes.
Okay. And what does that involve? As far as, I mean, what do they ask you to do as an advocate?
Emails.
Emailing? Lots of work?
Many emails, yes. Just always, keeping yourself informed about what the Arthritis Foundation is doing, and advocating on behalf of, getting things passed for the Arthritis Foundation. So that's been really rewarding. I've been able to learn a lot through the Arthritis Foundation because of Josiah and Unity being diagnosed, and it's been really helpful.
I would imagine that since, the children aspect is not quite as common, that you would be asked a lot of questions as far as people through the foundation. Is that the case as well?
Not necessarily through the foundation, but like when we're in the grocery store or something, and I'll, bring up the subject that, well, I'm kind of, careful of what they do and where they go because they have arthritis. Like when they first were diagnosed, I was always afraid of them, falling down, doing normal kid things.
Right.
Because in my mind, it was, you're gonna break a bone.
Right.
Sit down, don't move. So, and then people would be like, well, they're so young. Why do they have arthritis at this age? And
yeah.
So that's what I normally get.
Interesting. Is there and I know it's going to be a general question, but is there a particular area of the body that is more susceptible to arthritis in your experience with children?
For them, Josiah is his knees.
His knees.
Big time.
Predominantly, for sure. Okay.
I mean, it's the swelling, it's the redness. He also has the pain in his ankles, his elbows, his fingers, and his wrist. Unity is mainly her knees. But Josiah's kind of like all over.
Okay, because when I think of arthritis, I think of fingers, and I don't know if that's just from commercials or why I've been socialized that way. But I assume it affects every part of the human body.
Well, wherever, yes, it affects every part of any joint, depending on the disorder. And what we'll see is the pattern of joint involvement will oftentimes tell us the disorder they have.
Right.
So that it becomes, rheumatoid arthritis very rarely would affect the spine, except for the very top of the spine And usually that's after 10 or 15 years worth of rheumatoid arthritis.
Right.
And it can also affect the organs. Like they have to, every 6 months, go get eye examinations to make sure that their eyesight is fine, get blood work to make sure that their heart, their kidneys, and everything is still in order.
Now, is that because that's a muscle and it's being affected the same way?
These are actually systemic disorders.
Oh, okay. All
so
right.
that it's the immune system, which there isn't a part of the body. There's some areas that are more protected from the immune system. Places like the eyes actually have kind of set up so that they won't respond, and you can't have inflammation, or it's very difficult.
Oh, okay.
And then that breaks down in some of the autoimmune diseases, which is why they go for their eye exams, because they can get inflammation in their eye.
Right.
Because that part of the immune system can be broken down. And unfortunately with kids with stills, I'm not sure that they always have symptoms of the eye. So that's why they just periodically have
Check
to go.
it. Right. Okay.
Because we don't know when it's going to, and we don't want it to be there for very long.
Right.
So they want to pick it up before it actually causes damage.
Happens, right.
Optimism type things for arthritis, if we look back to the people that trained me and listen to their stories, when they were in training, the waiting rooms in their rheumatology fellowship were crammed with wheelchairs. When I was in training, occasional wheelchairs came in. And now in my office, if a person comes in a wheelchair, it's because of their stroke or their MS. It's not because of their arthritis.
Gotcha.
The last 10 years have actually been kind of fun because the number of knee replacements and hip replacements in rheumatoid arthritis patients have actually declined per population.
Oh, well, that's
Whereas in
promising.
osteoarthritis, those numbers are still going upwards.
Interesting.
So we've done lots of big things for things like rheumatoid arthritis and some of the juvenile type stuff, and have truly affected it.
Right.
Whereas before 1980, life expectancy was off by about 15 years in people with rheumatoid arthritis.
Oh my goodness.
Whereas with more aggressive therapy, it's the same as the general population.
That's cool. We've got about 3 minutes left, and so I wanted to ask if there was anything else you wanted to say that arthritis, how does arthritis make you feel? To make you mad?
Well, it hurts when it like hurt my knees a little bit, it gets me mad. And then sometimes, before I even start getting mad, it starts hurting more
Yeah.
and more.
Yeah. How about you? Does it make you mad too?
It makes me angry.
Yeah, angry. Well, that's okay, but you're working through it and you're being strong, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yes, I can tell. That smile's too cute to not show that you're doing all right. I would like to thank you all again for being here, of course. I'll reintroduce you. John Kolstoe, he is a rheumatologist here in East Lansing. And of course, Unique Jones and her lovely children, Unity Espinoza and Josiah Espinoza. And Junior's over there. He wasn't on camera, but he's been sitting so quietly. Thank you for being here as well.
Our producer.
Our producer, exactly. Thank you. And I'd like to thank all the viewers for joining us this evening, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.